Hello, this is the Artis with Ivy Reiss, and today I am speaking with author and Middle East expert Ian Thomas Shaw. We will be talking about his new book, Quill of the Dove, and his experiences in the Middle East as a peace advocate. Quill of the Dove is a political thriller and literary fiction blend set in the Middle East, launched in 2019 by Guernica. It has already attracted significant interest from the film industry and foreign publishers, and was most recently optioned by Original Pictures for a limited TV series, which will be airing on HBO and Netflix and other major networks. The French, Spanish, and Catalan translations for the novel will be published in 2020. Ian's voice in his work has already been described as a strong and confident, weaving a tale with a knowledge of culture and history that draws and transports the reader right from the beginning, by Dietrich Kaltheis, award-winning author of Ride the Lightning. Quill of Dove is a suspenseful, powerful, and ambitious novel, said Sonia Sakely, author of The Lebanese Dishwasher. Ian's first novel, Soldier Lily, Peace and Pearls, about Vietnamese refugees in Canada in 2012, was published under the pen name Conku. As a significant contributor to Canada's literary landscape, Ian Thomas Shaw is the founder for the Ottawa Review of Books, the Prose in the Park Literary Festival, and Duvalier Publishing, and the MECA Reading Series. From 2015 to 2018, he was the president of the Ottawa Independent Writers. Over the last 34 years, Ian has lived in the Middle East at various times as a Canadian diplomat and development worker, mostly in the Middle East, including 2 years in the Gaza Strip. Ian is based out of Ottawa and speaks English, French, Spanish, German, and Arabic. This autumn, Ian will be releasing 2 new books, The Marginal Ride Anthology, again by Duvalier Publishing, and a Spanish to English translation, The Unending Journey by Mapelé Publishing. But we will tell you more about these at the end of the interview and the events where you can find Ian this weekend. Ian, thank you for making it. How are you?
I'm great. I'm wonderful to be here, Ivy.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You drove all the way from Ottawa, and then you encountered a throng of protesters for climate change today.
Absolutely. They were just outside, and I felt like joining them, but, you know.
We had to be. The show must go on, right?
The show must go on. Precisely.
Well, as a Middle East specialist and an advocate for peace, you have lived and worked in the Middle East at various times for over 30 years. As I understand, you were there, you've been posted in Saudi Arabia, Syria, and as an NGO development worker, you worked in the Gaza Strip in 93 and 94, which was a really significant time. You've even been there during the Lebanese Civil War. How have these experiences influenced your book?
Well, the book draws on a lot of the experiences. My first time in the Middle East was actually going there to study Arabic. And at that point, I was 23 years old, and I spent a year studying Arabic in Jordan and Syria. And the Lebanese Civil War was going on right beside, Syria. And so I met a lot of Lebanese that were in Damascus. I tried to go to Lebanon. I was prevented from doing so. So it was years later that I went to Lebanon, just as the Civil War was coming to an end. What I tried to do in the novel.
And what year was that for our viewers who may not, so we can position it, who may not know?
So it would have been 79. I was there for a year, 79, 80, studying in Damascus and Jordan. And then later in about 90, I went back to Lebanon and did a trip there. And then after that, I was in the Gaza Strip for 2 years, 93 and 94. Then there were some postings I did in Saudi Arabia and Syria as a diplomat after that. I've been a diplomat since 95.
Wow.
And before that, I did almost 10 years of development work in Canada and also in Ethiopia and the Gaza Strip. So the Gaza Strip was probably the most important event for me, living there for 2 years. The first year, the Gaza Strip was still administered by Israel. The second year, the Palestinian Authority came in. In fact, for about 3 or 4 days, Yasser Arafat was my neighbor,
Wow.
literally 50 feet away.
Wow.
which I didn't know at the time until I came home the day we arrived, and all these checkpoints were put up, and people wouldn't let me through to my house until I explained who I was, and then they let me through. So it was a very exciting time. It was exciting because both on the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, there were a lot of advocates for coming to a sustainable peace. Of course, the negotiations were difficult, but the impetus for peace was very strong during that period. It's sad to say that now, many years later, this is really not the case. The sides are very far apart, and it's becoming more and more difficult to envisage a permanent peace in the area. So part of Quill and the Dove was to take these experiences and to explain to people that perhaps are not of my age or younger, this period of hopefulness. And also to explain some of the conflicts in the Middle East, particularly the Lebanese Civil War. What were the reasons why it broke out? Why did Israel invade Lebanon twice? These type of things are important for younger readers to have an idea of. It's not a history book,
Yes.
it is a novel, but often people understand through fiction their history better than simply opening a history book and reading nonfiction about.
I agree, and that's why I kind of feel like it's more of a historical fiction book, because a lot of the characters are fictional, but the facts are based historically accurately. But we'll come back to that. I want to pick up on something you said there. So that's an interesting time, like 93, 94, now Yasser Arafat and all of that. Now the Iron Curtain fell in 91. And how would you say that affected? I mean, there was a lot of hope at that time with the falling of the Soviet Union, I think, across Europe. And I know you were parts of Europe have affected the Middle East. How do you think that translated in 93, 94? And
well, it had a big impact. Before the fall of the Soviet Union and its allies were basically supporting the Arabs, and the United States and Western allies who were supporting Israel. And you had a large number of warships in the Eastern Mediterranean, Soviet and Russian warships. So the geopolitical aspect of the Middle East conflict was extremely important up to the fall of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union fell, and we saw one of the major conflicts in the world now being attenuated, the conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States and Western Europe, people became hopeful that maybe other conflicts could finally come to an end. And the Spanish government decided in 1992 to invite the Israelis and the Palestinians to Spain for the Madrid conference.
oh yes, that was a pivotal moment.
It was a pivotal moment, and there was extreme optimism. People had to make concessions, ideological concessions, before they even went there. For the Palestinian side, it was a question of accepting the existence of the State of Israel, which was very firmly enunciated, at the Madrid conference. For the Israeli side, it was to accept the concept of a two-state solution. So the foundations of what would be a permanent peace were already laid in Spain at the Madrid conference. I came to the Gaza Strip probably about a year and a half later.
Yes.
And the second intifada had broken out, but still, nonetheless, there were a lot of people saying, all we have to do is get back to the principles of Madrid and we can move this thing forward. So I'll describe one very important event that I witnessed. When the Israeli soldiers were withdrawn from the Gaza Strip, for most of the Gaza Strip, at least from the city of Gaza, the Palestinians, who had been involved not just in throwing stones, but actually picking up arms against the Israeli presence there, went up to the soldiers and shook their hands.
So there was a sign of peace.
There
or
was
that
a definite,
we may be able to work together.
Yeah, absolutely.
The two-state solution. So, because one of the questions I had was, how was it received? So it seems like there was openness to accepting it.
There was openness in that period. And I'll give you another example, which was very important to me personally, and I describe at the back of the book in the acknowledgements. During the period I worked there, I was in and out of the Gaza Strip. And I had Gaza plates on my car. There were special plates that were reserved for international organizations. I ran the Save the Children Federation, development program. So I had these special plates. But for the Israelis, it said Gaza. So as I was going back in, close to the border with Gaza, there was a nursery for plants. So I decided to buy some plants for my garden. So I bought some plants, quite a few, and the young girl working there, was helping me take the plants to my car. When she got to the car and she saw the Gaza plates, she said, "Just a minute." And she went back and she brought 6 more plants. And I said, "Well, I didn't buy those." She said, "No, they're a gift to you." I said, "Well, why are you giving me a gift?" And she said, "Because you're helping people in the Gaza Strip, and these people are going to be our neighbors. So we appreciate what you're doing."
So she was happy about it.
Yeah, she was. She belonged to a kibbutz. It was known for being a left-leaning kind of pro-peace kibbutz anyway. But as soon as she asked me why I was doing the Gaza Strip, and I explained I was doing development work, that's when she went back and she brought these extra, plants for me. And I thought, if a young girl who's probably 16 years old can think this way and be so motivated by what's going on, to think that one day that there will be peace and that she'll be able to go into the Gaza Strip and Gazans will come out, Palestinians, and they will be neighbors and maybe friends. I thought this type of enthusiasm is the key to peace in the Middle East.
Absolutely. That leads me into something, but I want to just clarify. So the kibbutz are more of the left-leaning Israelis. I mean, for myself and the viewers, I think. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page.
The kibbutzim, some are on the left, some are more conservative.
Is it a tribe?
But no, the kibbutzim are collective farms.
Oh. Okay.
So when the Israeli settlers first came to Palestine at the beginning of the 20th century, often they established these collective farms because they were very socialist. They had a lot of socialist ideals, the early
Which
settlers.
would have bled from the Soviet times, perhaps.
Well, it came from they came even before the creation of the Soviet Union.
Okay.
But in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe at the end of the 19th century, a lot of Jewish people were involved in socialist movements, the Communist Party, the socialist parties in different parts. And the people that decided to go to Palestine and settle there brought these type of ideals with them. Now, since then, people living on kibbutzim are a very small percentage of the Israeli population. If you take the case of Prime Minister Rabin, Yitzhak Rabin, he was a military man. He was the head of the army and the Israeli armed forces. And he came around to seeing that there was this possibility of peace. And he led the Israeli population towards a permanent peace. Unfortunately, Rabin was assassinated by an extremist, an Israeli extremist.
What year was that?
I think his assassination was 95, if I'm not mistaken.
So that
95
is
or 96, yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
And then the Gaza Strip was probably more contentious after that, I would imagine.
well, again, what happened was in the next elections, Rabin was from the Labour Party and he was assassinated. Then the Likud government came in, which was right-wing and less enthusiastic about peace, definitely. And the problems with the Palestinians came up because the Palestinians started to lose hope that they had a partner, in the Israeli government after Rabin. Rabin was not an easy person. He was a very tough negotiator, He insisted on a lot of things. But the Israeli population at that point were willing to follow him on a path to peace. He was also supported by his foreign minister, Shimon Peres, who later became a prime minister of Israel. And the two of them kind of were the architects on the Israeli side for coming to a two-state solution with the Palestinians. It was under Rabin's premiership that the Gaza Strip was, or the Israeli forces in the Gaza Strip were pulled back, and that the city of Jericho was initially given to the Palestinians and later on other areas of the West Bank. So had Rabin continued, had he lived and not been assassinated, I think that perhaps today we'd be looking at a very different Middle East, a Middle East where there would be two states. and that they would be cooperating with each other and living in peace. So one assassin's bullet can change the course of history.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that, of course. I think most people would. And, you've just, so Quill of the Dove, incredible book. It's up for, possibly might win a prize on Sunday at the Guernica event. Now, you've described it as a flashback type of a novel, and it spans from, if I remember correctly, from 73 to 2003?
There's two periods.
Yes.
One is a few months in 2007, and one is a period between 1975 and 1982.
Yes.
And so the flashback element is the 75 to 82, and what's more or less the present element is a few months in the year 2007.
Yes, and then 1975 to 82. Now, that is not only was that pivotal, but in the turning point in the Middle East, but you in the novel itself, I know you tell us a little bit about the characters. I mean, you propose a solution that could possibly fix the problems in the Middle East. You have three main characters, and one of the critics on your book has even described that the whole thing's documented through the eyes of journalists. I mean, it's that realistic.
So I was very influenced by the work of Robert Fisk, Pity the Nation, about the Lebanese Civil War and about his writings. He's a British journalist. He's probably one of the leading experts of the Middle East. So I thought, I would have as one of my main characters a journalist. And I also want to give some type of recognition to the very dangerous work that foreign correspondents, conduct. There's many that have been killed, in wars and the like, as they try to bring the reality, the news, the facts to the world.
And they're affected as well.
And they're
PTSD and everything.
Absolutely. So one of the characters is a French journalist by the name of Marc Tarragon. And in the earlier period of the book, he's just a student. He goes to Lebanon to learn Arabic because he's thinking about journalism and the like. Later, in the year 2007, he brings two people that he's met during the Lebanese Civil War because he stays for 7 years in Lebanon. One is a Palestinian fighter and leader who's now a dissident leader. His name is Abdallah Akawi. And the other is Israeli leftist pro-peace politician by the name of Jonathan Bronstein.
So it's quite a mix of different personalities, and these are the three protagonists in the novel.
That's right. And Tarragon calls them to come together to say, look, the governments have failed. They've been unable to negotiate a peace treaty. They're too far apart. But we know the people are not there. So let's draft a peace treaty as a private initiative, go to the international community, seek endorsement from those people that really want to get the peace initiative going, peace movement going again, then take that back to Israel and the Palestinians and the Arab world and try to get them on board. So this would be more of a grassroots thing as opposed to coming from the governments. Then the governments, both sides, the Palestinian leadership and the Israeli leadership, would feel the pressure to sit down and to take a look at and perhaps use elements, if not all of it, to have a permanent peace. So that's the idea. Of course, taking that, and they do succeed in drafting something that's quite sensible, that deals with some of the really difficult issues. And then they tried to take it to the international community. Unfortunately, people want to stop them because there are those people that will not entertain the idea of peace except on their terms. So there's interference, it becomes a bit of a spy thriller at that point as such. What's interesting is in the backstories during the Lebanese Civil War, you learn how Tarragon meets the two others and the relationship to other characters in the novel. And there are many characters in the novel. It's not just one protagonist, it's more of a community of characters that's being described. And each of the characters exhibits human behavior in a different way, but also the political influence or the influence of politics and conflict on their lives. And so I want to bring out in the novel what happens to people when there is a conflict that they cannot control, that they cannot prevent. How do they react to that? Do they get caught up in the conflict? Do they become combatants? Do they continue to work politically to end the conflict, you know? Do they observe and document the conflict like journalists do? So I wanted to use many different characters to have those different perspectives on, you know, what happens when is a major conflict.
That's really nice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can envision it as you're talking about it, and I'd really like to read the one review from David Wellman, author of The Verdict on Earth, on Each Man Dead. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with my eyes today. They're very dry, and it's hard to see. So, yes, Quill of the Dove. This is what David Wellams says. Quill of the Dove approaches the history of Lebanon through the eyes of international journalists called upon to take a huge personal risk to report the complicated facts. This is a terrific way for Shaw to tell his tale. Richly drawn characters, enhanced by his profound knowledge of the Middle East, ensure that we are along for the whole ride, with men and women trying to make a difference while just trying to stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
So you really picked up on that. Now, this peace initiative that you have in the novel, that is totally fictional, though, right?
Yeah, it's a fictitious peace
but
initiative.
it puts together a plan that would which I think is really cool, because you've been there for on and off. You've lived there for over 34 years. The reviews are endless on your expertise and knowledge of the culture and the various levels and layers of issues within the Middle East, Israeli, Palestinian cultures, and you propose this peace initiative that you believe that perhaps it could work.
Well, I had to put a PC initiative in for the purposes of the novel. And so naturally I took the elements which I thought were rather audacious and tried to address them. But I should also say that during the period that I've been a diplomat and even as a development worker, there have always been what we call second track peace initiatives, where academics, where civil society come together from both sides and they discuss what is needed for a peace. They don't leave it completely with the government. So there have been several attempts in the last 20 years or more for these second track peace initiatives to take off, to inform people, and they have influenced government thinking. So in some ways, this is a similar type of exercise, but it deals with just 3 men. So it's very tight. And these are 3 men with a lot of authority. Tarragon has a lot of authority internationally. He's known by the French government. He has friends everywhere. Akawi is a leading figure in the Palestinian movement, though he's a dissident these days. So the 3 people involved, Tarragon, Bronstein, and Akawi, have a lot of credibility in their own communities. Tarragon is known by world leaders, European leaders in particular, for his, journalism, his stellar journalism, and his expertise in the Middle East. Bronstein was a leading member of a leftist political party in Israel,
Yes.
and is a journalist as well. So he's very well known. People listen to him. And Akawi is a major figure in the Palestinian movement, although these days, or in 2007, he had become a dissident. He wasn't going along with the leadership. He wants something new. So they thought, if we can hammer out a peace initiative ourselves, with the differences that we have, we can gain support internationally, and we can gain support inside our community, because this peace initiative that we will do will be closer to what people want and people realize they have to do to have a sustainable peace. And then we can go to the Israeli leadership and the Palestinian leadership and convince them to use this peace initiative as a starting point.
So the peace initiative that you have in Quill of the Dove, that is a fictional concept in the novel. But what I think is, it has a feel like it could actually be plausible in real life if the people came together. You've got these characters that have a lot of sway in their background. What do you think?
Well, definitely, I needed a peace initiative as part of the novel. That was part of the plot. But since I was put in a peace initiative, I gave my best shot to create an innovative peace initiative based on my own experiences, my own understanding of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, to put something forward. And the reason why this peace initiative is plausible and credible to others, in the novel, is the three people that actually drafted it. One was Tarragon, Mark
Yes.
Tarragon, who's an international journalist. He knows European and international leaders throughout the world because of his journalism work. He's considered an expert on the Middle East. The other is Jonathan Bronstein, who was a leader at one point of a major political party in Israel, a pro-peace party, and is a journalist in his own right. Then Abdullah Abkawi, who is a major figure and a previous fighter in the Palestinian movement, who is now a dissident Palestinian leader. And all of them have great credibility in their own communities. So the thinking was, if the three of them can hammer out a peace initiative recognizing all the difficulties that are involved, they could take it back to their own communities, they could take it to the international communities, and with a groundswell of support for this private initiative, the Palestinian leadership and the Israeli leadership would feel the pressure to go back to the bargaining table and to start anew using that private initiative as a basis. Of course, things would be renegotiated and all of that, but it would be a basis, a starting point. Because in 2007, the reality was the Israelis and the Palestinians were so far apart, there was no longer any basis for them to negotiate on. They had drifted very far away from where they were in 1993, 94.
Absolutely. And that's in 2007 right there where you kind
Right.
of leave it off in the novel. Now, you've told me, and I'd like to, moving into kind of hypothetical real life, I mean, the tensions and the problems in the Middle East have been ongoing for so long. And it is so, there's no easy solution. And there is, you told me that perhaps a special status for Jerusalem could work. And you had some ideas about that in a way to bring the people together. Because Jerusalem is such an important city.
Absolutely. The idea of a special status for Jerusalem is not a new idea. In the original UN plan, there was supposed to be an international status for Jerusalem, and then the Palestinians would have their state and the Israelis would have their state. What they didn't really recognize is the very strong attachments of both sides to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
For Jewish people who are religious or even non-religious, the concept of, having Jerusalem as part of their state is extremely important. The same with the Palestinians for the Arab part of the city. So in the peace initiative, what I suggested was that the Jewish part of Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, would be part of the Israeli state. The Arab part would be part of the Palestinian state. But Jerusalem would be the spiritual capital for both, for Jews, for Muslims, and for Christians, but it would not be the political capital.
That sounds like a good idea.
And then to ensure that Jerusalem would be a city of peace, as opposed to the front lines of a conflict between the two, that the Jerusalem would be administered by a municipal government. And in the municipal government, the Palestinians and the Israelis would elect the equal number of councillors, and they would decide on everything that related to the needs of the citizens. So sewage, police forces, things like that. And that the police force would be also jointly put together, where you would have Palestinians and Israelis serving side by side. And then for the international community, through the United Nations, to appoint a distinguished person to head up the municipality, to be almost like an ombudsman.
Yes.
To make sure that if things started to go astray, that there would be someone that was not on either side able to bring the councillors together, the police force and the like. The other element was the concept of a complete ban on arms inside Jerusalem. that no one could carry a firearm inside
That sounds
Jerusalem.
reasonable to me.
And if anyone encroached upon these rules, they would be expelled permanently from the city's municipal boundaries. So it's a bit like London, where citizens and even the police force, they do not have arms. There's a few
Yes.
policemen that do. And so it's kind of taking that civilized concept of demilitarizing, removing arms, removing the points of conflict in the city of Jerusalem, whereas the rest of the Israeli state would have its own rules, and they would determine whether people could bear arms or not. The same with the Palestinian state. But Jerusalem would have that special status. This is an idea that a lot of people do not like. You know, that there is a strong feeling among the Jewish communities abroad and in Israel that all of Jerusalem should only be controlled by Israel, and there should be no sharing of any type of sovereignty over Jerusalem. On the Palestinian side, Jerusalem has their most holy sites, whether they're for the Muslims or for the Christians, and also for the Arab world. So you can't have it both ways. You can't have one side controlling all of Jerusalem. It has to be a joint effort, although that is a very contentious point for many people, and many people would really go to great lengths to prevent that from happening. And that's sort of what happens in the novel, that these type of points are the things that galvanize the opposition to the peace initiative.
And you obviously explore the ways in which these ideas may be sabotaged or start coming to fruition and then
Right.
halted.
Yeah, since it's a novel, there's of
Yes.
course, action
Subplots.
and subplots and things like that to keep the reader's attention. But there's also that political framework. And I'll say one thing that I learned when I lived in the Gaza Strip, and I was in and out of Israel all the time.
Mm-hmm.
If you talk to people in Tel Aviv, most of them would be happy with this type of solution. They would have always been happy because they don't have that attachment. When you go to Jerusalem and people that have immigrated to Jerusalem from other parts of the world, they would not necessarily be happy with that type of solution. So Israelis are not a monolithic group. There are many of them that what's important is not Jerusalem, and there are some where it's extremely important. It's the same with the Palestinians as well.
Yeah. As you're speaking, it's just making me think about this independent film that was done a few years ago. And unfortunately, I can't remember its title, but it was about, I'm sure I could find it if I looked online, but it was about a hospital. I'm sure it was at TIFF. And that was based, I think it was either the West Bank or the Gaza Strip. I think it was the West Bank, though. And when you're speaking about the young girl earlier on in the interview as well, I thought about this because it's real footage, real life footage, and it was an independent film, and it showed you had children who were obviously having their limbs blown off in the conflicts, and this hospital is positioned right there, and for the first time you've got a Palestinian mother beside an Israeli mother, and they're both. And the humanity that was outpouring within the hospital, because you realize we're actually the same. Both our kids have been injured in these conflicts. We care about our children. We care about each other. We're just humans. Why are we fighting? We're all suffering in the same manner. And it was an incredible movie. And I think, when you say there's a lot of people who would support it, you're right. And
the Israeli film industry has a number of films, and often they're Arab Jewish productions. There's
this film
fairly
was
prominent
subtitled.
Arab, filmmakers that live in Israel. They're Palestinians. They're part of the 1948 state, and they deal with these very difficult topics. In the West, we don't see very much of this. This is almost an internal debate where they're dealing with these issues inside Israel. And it's a shame because I think that what we see in the West is very stereotypical, it's very black and white, and that if we understood the conflict better, if we understood the human element of this conflict, we would be less likely to take sides on one side or the other, and we would be more likely to be pushing both sides to come together for a permanent peace.
Exactly. Yes, the human element is everything, and I think we do pay a lot of lip service to that in North America with anything, with racism, just in general.
Right.
But I mean, at the end of the day, the human element is really the one thing that binds all of us, all of humanity. And can I ask you if you have any comments? I mean, see, when Congressman Omar wanted to go into the Gaza Strip, she wanted to see what was going on, and then they were prevented from entering. And I think, if I recall correctly, it was back in August, they were allowed to go. But I mean, again, do you have any comments on that?
Well, I still work for the government, and so when I wrote the novel, I made a decision that I would set it back far enough
I see.
that it wouldn't have any commentary on current politics, particularly the particular situation with the American government and the Israeli government, of today. So I'd prefer not to get into
That's
the current and to look at this issue through a more historical perspective. Because I think the historical perspective is what's important. It's not the individual incidents that are taking place in 2019 which are important, but to actually look at this conflict, what the roots are, how you can push people together to end the conflict, what are the human motivations, whether people feel insecure, fear of the other side, not knowing the other side. These are very important factors that have to be addressed if you want to have a permanent peace. And the headline that we might see in tomorrow's Globe and Mail about some small act, is not really what's important.
Yeah. On an international level, I mean, regarding movies and the way it's represented in the media, coming back to your comment a few moments ago, and you were saying it's more of the way it's being dealt with, it's more internal. Would you say it would be helpful, though, if the human element could come out, whether it's through pop culture, movies, books like your own, for the West to see, or this side of the world to see more and understand the human element? Would that be helpful?
I think it would be helpful. I mean...
And in de-escalation and...
I mean, my novel, I describe it, and others describe it as a blend between literary fiction and political thriller. If you look at most political thrillers, they actually do the opposite. They rely on stereotypes. They rely on the good guy, the bad guy, the enemy, the agent, the terrorist. Everything is black and white because they want a lot of action. So they want that violence to come in, and that's how spy novels are often written.
I think the Gaza Strip is the one part in the world where we don't need more action.
But not everyone has written spy thrillers that way. John le Carre, many years ago, wrote the novel The Little Drummer Girl.
Yes.
And that was turned into a motion picture, and it was very famous. But the novel itself is a very sophisticated work of fiction. And though he captures the human element with various characters, as I try to do as well, he doesn't just create stereotypes. He doesn't rely on stereotypes to please the reader. He's actually taking the reader through a more educational process. And he's a phenomenal novelist. And I think that those are the type of novelists, the type of fiction that needs to come to the forefront, that needs to be made into films or TV series or whatever it is. So it enters into popular culture, because popular culture has been sidetracked the same way as with video games, with all sorts of violence. Popular culture is dehumanizing real conflicts in the world that need support from other people in order for those conflicts to end.
And due attention.
Yeah, absolutely. And occasionally we come across those great films, those great novels. I mean, The Killing Fields, which is taking place in Cambodia, was a brilliant novel. It showed how kind of authoritarian type of regime with starting idealistically to have an egalitarian society completely collapsed and created a totalitarian society where people were dying, and they captured that. So those type of films, those type of works of fiction, I think bring up our humanity as readers. When we read those type of things, we walk away from with a sense of what's wrong and what's right, and not based on our ethnicity or our religion or anything else, but on the human level. So more of that, I think, is important. What I'll say is, which might be a bit of a criticism, is that often in Canada, we focus on kind of the individual drama that people go through, which is important, help, abuse when you're a child or things like this. And that's often a major feature of our fiction. And we have too few writers that are willing to go out and learn about the rest of the world and bring it back to Canada, putting a Canadian lens, which is an important lens, I think, because I think we're a good society, to help readers in Canada understand what's going on elsewhere in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd like to mention a book that you might be interested in. Joyce Wayne, she launched a book in April 2018, Last Night of the World, and that starts off in 1945 Ottawa, and it was a Canadian first. It's been incredibly well received, and right at the beginning of this, the Cold War and Canada's role, and it's a real life story of Frida Linton, who was a Soviet spy on Canadian soil, and the entire Gushenko affair, and how the Canadians were actually the first to discover that the Soviets were spying on us prior to MI16 and the FBI. And I think, have you heard of it in the Ottawa Review or something?
Yes, I think with our Ottawa Review of Books that one of my reviewers reviewed that maybe a few months ago. I'd have to check, though.
That sounds about right. Yeah. I know the Toronto Star reviewed it. She had a lot of top reviewers, and the book tour was really successful. But Quill of the Dove has already been picked up to be on TV, which gets into the realm of pop culture so people can see it. So Original Movies picked it up, and it's going to be on cable TV.
So it's Original Pictures of Toronto.
Yes.
They've optioned the novel,
Okay.
which means that they'll do their best efforts to turn it into a TV limited series. That's 10 to 13 episodes. When you make a film, there's a lot of steps, bringing the financing together, bringing the production. But they seem very keen on it, and I've sold them the rights to do that. And now I'll wait and see. It may take a couple of years, but I'm optimistic that they'll pull it together. And I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be a stellar, set of episodes, and they have the freedom, the artistic freedom to change things, but I think it'll be really something that we all can be proud of once it happens. But it's up to them now to do the production, of course. I'm just the novelist.
Yeah, but it will be based on Quill of the Dove.
It will be based on Quill of the Dove, and they intend to follow the plot line as much as possible, But, of course, when you write a screenplay,
you have to change something.
You have to change things, But it was exciting news that happened so fast. I have to thank my publisher, Guernica Editions, for making that happen. At the same time, Guernica is also being very active in selling rights to the novel to foreign publishers. We now have a French-Canadian publisher that's going to publish it in French, which will be available in France as well. And we have a Spanish publisher now, picking up the Spanish rights, and, if you can believe it, a Catalan
edition.
for Barcelona. Barcelona, that's really the cream or the cherry on the top of the pie. Or the sundae, I should say, because
icing on the cake.
The icing on the cake, because Catalan is a very sophisticated language. It's a sophisticated group of people. It's not the largest group. There's only about 8 or 10 million Catalan speakers in the world, but it's kind of a real compliment that this publisher decided that this book, which was just new, would be the book that he would want translated into Catalan for the public in Spain.
That's incredible. I do know that the European market is very different than the North American market, and Canadian publishers actually are very well respected on the European market. People don't just care about the New York Times bestsellers. We are known for that, but for writing good books. But I wanted to point out to readers, you were telling me there's something special about the orange.
Yes, well, the orange is a saffron orange, and Buddhist monks wear it. at least in Vietnam. And it's a sign of peace, serenity, and the like. There's several elements in the cover that relate to the pacifist theme of the novel. The dove itself, as you can see, the outline,
Yes.
which carries the F, which is the olive branch, as well. And then you can see that in the bottom, it's a wall that's being pot-marked by guns and shells and the like. And that's sort of the conflict, particularly the Lebanese civil war, but also the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So the concept is, even out of a serious ongoing conflict, there's a hope that peace can emerge.
And fly.
And fly. So it was with the graphic artist for Guernica that we went back and forth. He's a brilliant man. His name is Rafael Giacomatti, Brazilian, and he designed it with me based on some of the concepts I gave. So I'm very happy. Some people might find it a bit unorthodox. Most covers are not like this, but I think it does the trick for me, and I hope it will do it for others that pick up the book.
And the O for of, even actually,
for the
it's
eye.
like the eye of the dove.
Yes, it's very creative.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
And of course, so many connotations, even gunshots, bullseye. I mean, just, you know what I mean? Like the layers, which is what good fiction, literature fiction
Which is a bit what the novel's like, because the novel is very layered.
Yes. Well, we've got to wrap up, but people can find you. So you came all the way down from the Quebec-Ottawa border, and people can find you tonight at the Tartan Turban reading series at 7 p.m., I believe.
That's right.
And we're putting the info up on the screen right now. So 7 p.m., you will be reading at the Tartan Turban Secret Reading Series, which is at 577 Kingston Road, Unit 310. There's also a Facebook events page for the event. And you can also see the event on the artismagazine.com under the events page. It's there. And then this Sunday, you're going to be at Guernica Editions' annual prize event, right?
That's right. I'm not, it's not for me. I'll be actually a guest speaker there.
Oh, excellent.
Because Guernica has me on their advisory board.
Oh, I see.
And I helped out in the creation of the Guernica Prize 2 years ago. It's now its second year. I'm very excited to see who's won this year. And we'll be launching last year's winner, Kevin Wilson, who wrote An Idea About My Dead Uncle, a very interesting novel about Canada and China. So it's going to be a big event. I believe I
saw him read a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago at Guernica's event.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
A tall man.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was an
brilliant
interesting
writer.
narrative. It was very good.
Yeah.
And yours is very poetic. There is a poetic element to your prose.
I try a bit, you know. Yeah. Occasionally I write a poem or two, but.
Well, everyone. So is it open to the public though? The annual prize event?
It is.
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
Absolutely. 918 Bathurst.
Yeah, 918 Bathurst Street at the new Art and Culture Center. And again, that's this Sunday. It starts at 4 p.m. And the info should be up on the screen. And if you forget, the artismagazine.com's event page, we'll have it listed there too. It's already up. And well, good luck tonight.
Thank you.
At Tartan Turban
Ivy.
Reading Series. It's a fabulous event. I've been there a number of times. And I imagine it'll be a good crowd.
It's sold out apparently.
Oh,
but,
well, of course.
But if people turn up at the door, they might be able to squeeze them in.
I've been there before with standing space only. It's a lovely venue. And the man who runs it is also lovely. If his name escapes me, but he owns the building. You've got the 2 levels.
Gavin Barrett.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Barrett.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a very multicultural event too, which is interesting, you know.
Yeah.
So it kind of appeals to the internationalists, you know, part of me to be with other Canadian writers, you know, they've come from different parts of the world.
Oh yeah, it is a very multicultural event. All right, well, I just want to, and up on the screen right now too, there's images of Ian's books and the links to Ian Thomas Shaw's novels. Quill of the Dove, you can order it directly from GuernicaEditions.com, search by title. Soldier, Lily, Peace, and Pearls is published by Duvillier Publishing. Find it on their website, and again, it's under the name Concu, which was Ian's pen name. And the Marginal Ride anthology is also available at DuvillierPublishing.com/marginalride. You can visit Ian's website at ianthomasshaw, ianshaw.com, and find him on Facebook under Concu, and email him at duvalier@gmail.com. All the info is on the screen. And please purchase his book. It is incredible. $25 Canadian. Read it before the movies come out.
Thank you so much, Ivy.
Thank you for being on the show, Ian. Have a fabulous reading tonight, and all the best.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Once again, this was Ian Thomas Shaw, and we'll see you next month.